Pretend you are my betrothed, tonight for 1 hour." The young woman on the library ladder did not drop the book she was holding, which was the first remarkable thing about her, and did not ask him to repeat himself, which was the second. "Your Grace has been drinking," she said. "Your Grace has not touched a glass since 6 o'clock and has just come out of that saloon, because in 11 minutes the Marquess of Ardennes intends to stand up under my own chandelier in my own house and announce my engagement to his daughter." Gideon Carr put his back against the library door and heard, through 3 inches of oak, 400 people making the noise that 400 people make when they have been told there will be an announcement. "He has told the Duchess, my mother, who is delighted. He has told the newspapers, who will have it in print by 7 tomorrow. He has told his daughter, who does not want me. And he has done it without one word of consent from me, because he has calculated correctly, madam, that no man in my position will contradict a marquis in front of the entire diplomatic corps." "Then you should have contradicted him this morning." "He arrived at 9 and had the announcement written." The young woman came down the ladder. She was perhaps 24, in a gray stuff gown with black cuffs, and she had a leather apron over it, and ink on 3 fingers, and a pencil pushed into her hair. And she had been in the West Library of Colvane House every day for 11 weeks, and Gideon had spoken to her exactly twice. "Your Grace," she said, "I am the person cataloguing your books. I am paid £30 a year, and I sleep in the room above the still room, and I have 3 gowns, of which this is the best. If I walk into that saloon on your arm, the whole of this house will know inside a quarter of an hour who I am, and by Thursday the whole of the town will know, and you will have contradicted your Marquess at the cost of being ridiculous, and I shall be the ridiculous part. That is not a bargain, sir. That is a wall being knocked down onto somebody who happens to be standing in the yard." "You are right," said Gideon. "Then let go of the door. Let me put it to you properly, and if you say no, I shall let go of the door and go and be engaged." He did not move. "There are 400 people in that saloon. There is a marquis with an announcement in his pocket. And in 9 weeks a select committee of the House sits upon the war contracts of the late campaign, and my brother's name is on the list of persons whose dealings are to be inquired into, and my brother has been dead 2 years and cannot say one word for himself. Ardennes is on that committee. He came to me in July and told me, in a very friendly manner, over an excellent claret, that he holds a letter which would finish my brother's name forever, and that he would as soon it stayed in his desk, and that families connected by marriage take care of one another." Gideon heard his own voice go flat. "So I do not want your hand tonight, madam. I want 1 hour in which a marquis cannot stand up and announce a betrothal, because if that announcement is made in this house, tonight it cannot be unmade without a public scandal. And once I am tied to that man, I am tied to whatever he chooses to do to my brother's memory and my brother's widow, and I will have neither. 1 hour. Long enough for him to see that the ground is taken, and to put the paper back in his pocket, and to be obliged to come at me another way, and I would sooner face any other way." The young woman stood at the foot of the ladder with the book still in her hands. He saw her think. He had seen a good many people think in 11 years in the diplomatic service, and could tell the difference between a person calculating an advantage and a person weighing a thing, and she was weighing it. "What is the letter?" she said. "I have not seen it." "Then how do you know it is false?" "Because I knew my brother," said Gideon. "That is not evidence, sir. That is affection." "Yes," said the Duke of Colvane, "and it is all I have, and I have 9 weeks." She set the book down on the step of the ladder, spine up, open at her place, which he noticed and afterwards remembered. "3 conditions," she said. "Name them." 1. An hour, and not a minute past it. When the hour is out you will take me back to this door, and I shall go up the back stair, and it is finished. And tomorrow I am the woman who catalogues the books. 2. You will not lie about me. If anybody asks you who I am, you will not invent a fortune or a Yorkshire cousinship, because I will not have a lie that can be run down in a week by a curious dowager. My name is Clemency Hale. My father was a librarian and a scholar, and he is alive, and he is poor, and there is a thing said of him that I will not have said in that saloon by way of introduction. So you will say only that my name is Miss Hale, and that my father is a scholar, and that we are lately of the town of Sarhaven, and nothing else whatever. And if anybody presses, you will look at them the way you looked at the Portuguese chargé at dinner, and they will stop. 3. She untied the leather apron and folded it, taking her time. When this is over tonight, or in 9 weeks, whenever it ends, you will tell me the truth about the letter, whatever it turns out to be. Not the version for the family. I am not going to walk into a room and be used as furniture in a matter I have not been told the truth about. That is the whole of my price, and it is not money. Gideon Carrow looked at her for a moment. Agreed, he said. All 3, Miss Hale, your hair. What of it? There is a pencil in it. Clemency Hale put up her hand, found the pencil, looked at it, and laughed once. A short, surprised, entirely unstudied sound, and put it in her pocket, and something in the middle of Gideon's chest shifted about a quarter of an inch, and he did not attend to it for another 2 months. Your Grace will have to give me your arm, she said, because I do not know the way into your saloon. I have only ever come in at the garden door. The saloon at Colvane House was 90 feet long with 4 chandeliers in it, and there were 400 people under them. And the Marquess of Ardennes was standing at the far end by the pianoforte, with a folded paper in his hand, and his daughter beside him, and the Dowager Duchess of Colvane on his left. Gideon walked the whole length of that room with a woman in a gray stuff gown on his arm, and did not hurry. He had spent 11 years learning how a room is managed. It is not done with a voice. It is done by walking slowly, by looking at nobody in particular, and by arriving at the exact place from which everybody must turn to see you. And by the time he was 30 feet off, the conversation had gone out of that saloon like a tide, and every soul in it was looking at Miss Clemency Hale's gray stuff gown and her black cuffs and the ink on her fingers. Ardennes, said Gideon pleasantly, you have a paper. I have, your Grace. The Marquess of Ardennes was 60, upright, silver, with a face like the front of a bank. I had thought to make a small announcement, with your permission. Then I am glad I came in, because I should have been sorry to have the thing done twice in one evening. Gideon turned, unhurried, so that his back was 3/4 to Ardennes and his face to the room, which is the whole of that particular art. My friends, forgive me. I have kept a piece of news too long out of a wish to do it decently, and I find that decency is being got at from all sides tonight. This is Miss Hale. Her father is a scholar. They are lately of Sarhaven. She has done me the honor of accepting me, and I would rather present her to you in a plain gown out of my own library than in satin in 3 months' time, with the whole business arranged by other people. The noise that went round that room was not the noise he had expected. It was better. 400 people who had come to see the Duke of Colvane trapped by a Marquess were suddenly at a great deal more interesting spectacle, and there is nothing the town likes so much as a rich man doing something the town has not planned for him. The Dowager Duchess of Colvane went white to the lips and did not move a muscle of her face, which was, Gideon thought, magnificent of her. Lady Vespasia Ardennes, who was 26, dark, and had been standing beside her father for 11 minutes in the pose of a woman about to be sold, looked at Clemency Hale's gray gown and then at Gideon, and something went across her face very fast, that he was almost certain was relief. And the Marquess of Ardennes put the folded paper back into his pocket, and smiled with the whole of his face except his eyes, and said, "But this is delightful. Miss Hale, you must let me be among the first. I am an old friend of the family, and I take a very particular interest in the Duke's affairs, a very particular interest indeed." "So his Grace has told me," said Clemency Hale. It was, Gideon reflected afterward, a remarkable hour. She did not attempt to be a lady of fashion. That was the thing that saved it, and he had no notion whether it was calculation or simply that she had no materials for the attempt. She said the same 3 sentences to everybody who was presented to her, and they were true. And when the Austrian attaché's wife asked her in French whether she had been much in Paris, she answered in French that she had never in her life been out of England, but that she had read a great deal about it. And then, when the lady moved to Italian out of pure mischief, answered in Italian. And the story of that was round the saloon in 4 minutes, and did more for her than a fortune of £40,000. At the end of the hour, Gideon took her out by the small door at the north end and along the passage to the west library, and let go of her arm, and said, "Miss Hale, I am in your debt in a manner I cannot discharge. You may discharge it by remembering the 3rd condition." She was very pale, and he saw for the first time what the hour had actually cost her. Her hands were shaking. "Your Grace, that man is not going to go away." "No." He put his hand on my arm at the door and said that he hoped I understood what a delicate moment this was in the Duke's family, and that a young woman who was fond of a gentleman would not wish to be the cause of harm coming to his brother's memory, and that he should call on Thursday. She looked up. He was telling me the price. He was telling me on the assumption that I am a woman who has caught a duke and will do anything to keep him, which is what 400 people in that room now believe, and which is exactly what you and I have made them believe. Clemency Hale drew a breath. "So I will tell you plainly, sir, before you go back in. The hour is out, and I have kept my bargain, and you are free of me. But if you mean to stand and fight that man in 9 weeks over a letter you have never seen, then you will need somebody in this house who can read, and I have spent 11 weeks in this room, and I have got through 4,000 of your books, and there are 9,000 more. And I have not yet come to your brother's papers, and your Grace, they are in here. 3 cases of them under the window with the seals unbroken." His mother came to him at 9 the next morning, before the newspapers, which was a fair measure of her. The Dowager Duchess of Colvane was 59, small, and had buried a husband and a son in 4 years, without once in public losing the particular carriage of the head that had been drilled into her at 17. She came into the breakfast room, shut the door herself, and stood. "Who is she?" "Miss Clemency Hale. She has been in this house 11 weeks cataloguing the West Library, at £30 a year, and she is the daughter of a scholar of Sarhaven, and every word of that I said aloud last night in front of 400 people." "You did," said his mother. "You said it beautifully, and then you took her out by the north door at 10 minutes past 11, and she has not been seen since, and Stedman tells me she slept in her own room above the still-room, and that this morning at 6:30 she was back on the ladder in the West Library in a leather apron." She sat down at last. "So it is a device. Gideon, look at me. Is it a device?" "Yes." "Thank God." She shut her eyes for a second. "Then it is Ardennes, and you have done it to stop the announcement, and I am the greatest fool in this kingdom, because I sat beside that man for an hour last night being delighted." Her hands closed on the arms of the chair. "He came to me in June, you know, very kind, very fatherly. He said that the family stood in a difficult position with this committee coming, and that Vespasia had always been fond of you, and that he had it in his power to be of great service. And I heard it as a mother hears it. which is to say I heard a Marquess offering my son his daughter, and I thought about the estate, and about Marion, and the little one, and I never once heard the other thing underneath it. And you heard it in 9 seconds in July over a glass of claret. I have spent 11 years being lied to in 6 languages, ma'am. It is the whole of my education. Then use it, said the Dowager, because you will need it. What is in the letter? I do not know. Arden says only that it would finish Aubrey. He calls on Thursday. And the girl? Miss Hale, said Gideon, was told last night by Arden, at the door of the saloon with his hand on her arm, that a young woman who was fond of a gentleman would not wish to be the cause of harm coming to his brother's memory. That is what my betrothal has bought me in 11 hours. He has stopped threatening me and begun threatening her. His mother was silent a moment. Then it is not a device any longer, she said. It is a siege. You had better come and tell Marion before somebody brings her a newspaper. Lady Marion Carow had the south wing, and had had it for 2 years and rarely left it. She was 31, and she had married Aubrey at 22, and had buried him at 29 in a country where she did not speak the language, and had come home to England with a daughter of 3 and a lead coffin, and had walked into a drawing-room in the following spring, and heard a woman say behind her fan, £40,000, they say, and it went into the funds under another name. She had not accepted an invitation since. Gideon, she said when he had finished, say the last part again. That she is not in fact my betrothed, and that it was done to stop Arden's announcement, and that the whole town believes it, and that if I unmake it I am at his mercy, and if I keep it up she pays for it. Marion looked at the window for a while. Then she said, Nell is 5 in March. Do you know what she asked me in the summer, whether her papa was a bad man, not because anybody told her she cannot read, because a groom's boy said something to her at the mounting block, and she is 5, and she has understood already that there is a thing about her father that makes the room change. Her voice was perfectly level. So I will tell you what I want, and it is not delicacy, and it is not your reputation. I want that committee to say out loud that he did not do it, in public in print, so that in 11 years when somebody says £40,000 behind a fan at a ball, my daughter can say the words the committee reported, and the woman will have to be quiet. She looked up. Whatever it takes, and if it takes a betrothal that is not real, then I shall call her sister to her face in front of anybody you like, and I shall be very glad of her, and God forgive us both. The papers had it at 7, and the town had it by 10, and Colvane House received 19 morning callers before 3 o'clock, and would have received 60 if the door had not been shut at 1. And at 4:30 Gideon went down to the West Library, and found Clemency Hale on the floor in the leather apron, with the 3 sealed cases open around her, and 11 years of a dead man's papers in 9 piles, working with the concentration of a surgeon. Do not tread on the 4th pile, she said. It is out of order, and it is the only pile that matters. Miss Hale. Sit on the step-stool, your grace, and let me say a thing badly, and then we shall be sensible. Last night I made you 3 conditions and kept my hour and went up the back stair, and at 12:30 I put out my candle, and at 4 in the morning I was still awake, and at 6 I came down here and opened those cases. She sat back on her heels. Because it occurred to me somewhere about 2 o'clock that I have spent 6 years of my life being the daughter of a man who was accused of a thing he did not do and could not disprove, and that upstairs in this house there is a woman with a little girl who is in exactly that position, and that in 9 weeks a committee of gentlemen will sit down in a paneled room and decide it forever, and that I am the only person in England who has read the whole of the letter books in those cases. You have read them. I have read 40% of them since 6:30 this morning, and I have not eaten anything, and Mrs. Pardo is displeased with me. She pushed the pencil back into her hair. "Now, sit down and answer questions, and do not spare anybody, because I cannot work in a fog." So he sat on the step-stool in his own library and was interrogated for 2 hours by a woman in a leather apron. And it was, he thought afterwards, the beginning of the whole of the rest of his life. Aubrey Caro, Lord Aubrey, had been 11 years older than his brother and had been the best of them all. Easy, warm, useless at cards, incapable of keeping a coat clean, adored by servants. In the 4th year of the late war, he had gone out to the army in Corvania as one of the commissaries general, which was a post nobody wanted and which he had asked for, and he had spent 3 years buying grain, oats, salt beef, mules and firewood for 40,000 men in a country with no roads. And he had done it well, and had come home in the peace with a fever he never entirely lost, and had died of it 2 years ago in a hired house at Sarhaven with his wife holding his hand. 11 months after his death, the pamphlets began. It had started with a general accusation. The commissariat had been a sink. Everybody knew it. £400,000 unaccounted for across the whole service, and every clerk who had ever handled a warrant was under a cloud. Then in the spring, a pamphlet named names, and the 4th name was Caro, and it alleged that Lord Aubrey Caro had taken £40,000 in secret commissions from a house of contractors named Barsack and Nephew, in return for accepting grain at full price and short weight, and that in the winter of the 3rd year, at the passage of the Gan, 1,100 men of the Army of the North had been on half rations for 19 days. 1,100 men, said Clemency. 9 of them died. It is in the general orders. That is the peace that will hang him if it is believed, and it is why Ardennes is dangerous, and why the committee will not be able to be merciful. Nobody in England much cares what a commissary put in his pocket. They care about 19 days at half rations. And is the half rations true? Entirely true, said Gideon. There was no grain at the Gan for 19 days, and my brother wrote about it to my father in 11 letters, and I have read them, and he was very nearly out of his mind. Then that is the shape of it. She reached for the 4th pile. The best forgery is always laid over something true, sir, because then it cannot be denied without seeming to deny the thing everybody knows. Whoever made this letter did not invent the famine. He has taken a real famine and provided a villain for it, and the family of the villain will spend the next 50 years saying, but he was not the cause, and every time they say it, a room full of people will hear them denying that 1,100 men went hungry. She looked up. Which is why you cannot fight this by producing a good character. You must produce the forger. Gideon sat on the step-stool and looked at her. Miss Hale, he said, you have been in this house 11 weeks. Why did nobody tell me who you are? Because Mr. Lark engaged me by letter for £30 a year, and nobody engages a cataloguer for her conversation, said Clemency. And because when I came you were not here, you were at the coast for 6 weeks. And because on the 3rd day, Mrs. Pardo asked me at supper what my father did, and I told her, and she was very kind and never mentioned it again to anybody, which is the greatest possible kindness, and I shall never forget it. And it is also the reason nobody in your household has ever once asked me another question. Then I shall ask it, said Gideon. What is the thing said of your father that you will not have said in my saloon? Clemency Hale set down the letter she was holding. My father is Mr. Peregrine Hale, she said. He was for 19 years the keeper of the Renfield collection, 11,000 volumes and 400 manuscripts, in a house in the north, belonging to a family that has since died out. He is the best paleographer in England, and there are 3 men in Europe who write to him, and he is 68 years old and half blind, and lives at Sarhaven on £40 a year that I earn. Her chin came up in a manner Gideon was to see a great many times afterward. In the year I was 17, a manuscript went out of that collection. A book of hours, 9th century, worth £1,100. It was found 9 months later in a sale at Antwerp with the flyleaf cut out. My father had had the keeping of the keys, and there were 2 under-copyists in that library, and one of them swore that he had seen my father put a book into a wrapper on a Tuesday evening in November, and the family believed him, and my father was dismissed without a character and never charged, because they would not have the scandal of a trial. She said it entirely flatly. So he was never convicted and never cleared, and that is a worse condition than either. There is no committee to go to. There is nothing to answer. He wrote 9 letters to the family and 9 to the trustees and got no reply, and he sat down in a chair in a hired room at Sarhaven and grew old in about 14 months. She turned back to the pile. That is the thing. It is not to be said in a saloon, and it is certainly not to be said in the newspapers, which is one reason I told you last night that you must not invent a fortune for me. Because I am not afraid of being called a nobody, sir. But if some idle man in a club looks up the name Hale and remembers Renfield, then it is my father who pays for it, in a room at Sarhaven, and he has paid enough. Gideon got off the step-stool and stood in the middle of his own library. Miss Hale, he said, I am going to make you an offer, and it is a great deal worse than the one I made you last night, and you may take an hour or a day or a week over it. I want to hire you, not as a cataloguer, as my brother's advocate. You will have the whole of those cases, and the run of this house, and the use of Mr. Lark, and any expense you require, and £200, and a written character in my own hand at the end of it whatever the outcome. And because it is the only currency I have that you value, my word, that on the day this committee reports, whichever way it reports, I shall put the Renfield business into the hands of a man who has never lost an inquiry in his life, at my expense, and pursue it as far as it will go. And I want the betrothal to stand until the committee has reported, not a betrothal, the appearance of one, 9 weeks, because if it is unmade now, this morning, then Arden has the announcement in his pocket again by Friday, and every hour of the next 9 weeks is spent under his hand instead of on those papers. He made himself finish it, and I am aware precisely what I am asking. In 9 weeks it will end, and I shall be the Duke who was jilted or the Duke who was seen through, and I have a great deal of armor and can afford either. You will be the young woman who was in a great house on £30 a year and got herself engaged to a duke for 9 weeks. That is not the same coin at all, and I will not pretend that it is. Clemency Hale knelt on the library floor among 9 piles of a dead man's letters, and thought about it for a long time. Not £200, she said at last. 30, as agreed, and the same board and the character at the end. If I take £200 and it comes out afterwards, and everything comes out, sir, my father taught me that when I was 11, then I am a woman who was paid to be engaged to a duke, and there is not one person in England who would hear that any other way. She got up and dusted her hands on the leather apron. The rest I accept, 9 weeks. And you will keep the third condition. The truth, all of it, whatever it turns out to be, even if it turns out to be against your brother. Even then. Then we are agreed, said Clemency. And your grace, I have a 4th condition now, and it is a small one, and you will think it strange. Name it. When Lord Arden calls on Thursday, she said, let me be in the room. The Marquess of Arden came on Thursday at 3, and Gideon received him in the small drawing-room, and Clemency Hale was in it, in the second of her 3 gowns, with her hands in her lap. Arden did not turn a hair. He was too good for that. He kissed her hand, congratulated them both again, remarked that the newspapers had been offensively vulgar, and that one must simply not read them, and drank a cup of tea. and it was 20 minutes before he came anywhere near the thing he had come for, and when he did he arrived at it by way of a compliment. You will forgive an old man's plainness, Duke. I am glad. I say it in front of Miss Hale, and I mean it. Vespasia and I had, I confess, entertained a notion, but a father is a fool in such matters, and it is the young who must choose, and I would a great deal rather have your friendship than your civility. He set down his cup. And I intend to prove it. This committee. I am upon it, as you know, and I am, I hope I may say, not the least considerable member of it. And I have in my possession a document that has come into my hands, in the ordinary way of such things, from a person who was formerly in the contracts office. May I see it? You may hear it. Arden took out a pocketbook, and from the pocketbook a single half-sheet in a clerk's hand. This is a transcript. The original is in my desk, and it is not mine to hand about, and you will understand why. It will be evidence if it becomes evidence, and a document that has been round a family's drawing-room is a document any counsel in England can make a fool of. He put on his spectacles. It is a letter of 11 lines in French. It is dated the 14th of November in the 3rd year, from the commissary's quarters at Rouen. It is addressed to Monsieur Barsac of Barsac and Nephew, and it is subscribed A. Caro. He looked up. Shall I read the material part? Read the whole of it. I shall read the material part, which is 3 sentences, and I shall not read the rest, because the rest is about mules, and I am not here to torment you. Arden read, in a slow, clear, entirely unmalicious voice, in good French. The usual consideration to be lodged as before with Messrs. Coin in the sum agreed, and I rely upon your discretion in the manner of it. As to the deliveries for Gan, let the weights be made up as heretofore, and I will see that no question is raised at the receipt. For the rest, the mules are come at last, 19 of them, and the drivers are the greatest villains in this country. And I have paid 4 times what the beasts are worth, and shall do it again next month with a good conscience. He folded the half-sheet. Nobody spoke for a moment. Gideon discovered that his hands were quite steady, which surprised him, and that he was very cold. Duke, said Arden gently, I have been 30 years in public life, and I will tell you what that is. That is a letter that a jury would convict upon in 11 minutes, and that a committee will not be able to look past, because of the 3rd clause. Let the weights be made up as heretofore, and I will see that no question is raised at the receipt, and 1,100 men on half rations at Gan 19 days later, and 9 of them in the ground. He put the pocketbook away. It is in his hand. I have had it looked at. I am sorry. And it is in your desk, said Gideon. It is in my desk. Where it might remain. Where it might very well remain, said the Marquess of Arden, for I am not obliged to lay before a committee every piece of paper an unknown person sends me, and there are 100 such papers in this business, and 9/10 of them are trash. I said in July, Duke, and I say now in front of Miss Hale, that families connected by marriage take care of one another. He rose, and took up his hat, and smiled at Clemency with real warmth. You have chosen an excellent moment to become one of us, my dear, and I hope you will let me be an old friend. Do not let him brood. He broods exactly as his father did. Clemency Hale had not said one word in half an hour. She said one now, on her feet, in the middle of the room, as the Marquess reached the door. Gan, she said. Arden turned. I beg your pardon. The place, my lord, in the letter. Would you say it again as it is written there, not as you would say it as it is spelt? For the first time in the whole visit something happened behind the silver and the good manners, a flicker, no more, of a man being asked an unscheduled question. He took the pocketbook out again and looked and said, G-A-double-N-E Gan. It is spelt as it is on the maps. Yes, said Clemency Hale. Thank you. I have been reading about the campaign, my lord, since his grace and I were engaged, and I find I have a great many things to learn." "You will learn them all in a month," said Arden, charmed, and went out. Gideon shut the door himself and turned round. "Say it." "Not yet." She had gone perfectly white. "Sir, I need 3 days and the whole of the 4th case and a good map, and I need you not to hope, because I have one thread and it may be nothing, and I have watched what hoping does to people. But you may know this much, and then I am going back to the library and I shall want candles at 4. She had her hands pressed together. "In the 11 weeks I have been in this house, I have read something above 200 letters written by your brother from Corvania, to your father, to your mother, to his wife, to the office. He was not a careful writer. He spelt as he heard, which is why he is a pleasure to read. And in every one of those letters, without exception, that place is spelt G-A-N. Gan. Gan, as the army said it and as every soldier in the North spelt it for 4 years. She picked up her candle. "The double N and the E are the map spelling, sir. Your brother died 2 years ago. The map was made afterwards." The 9 weeks that followed had, Gideon came to think, 2 lives running side by side in them, and he did not notice for a long while that the second one had become the more important. The first life was the work. Clemency Hale set up in the West Library as a man sets up a campaign. The 3 cases turned out, and every document numbered, indexed, and cross-referred. A great sheet on the wall with a calendar of every day from the 1st of October to the 31st of December in the 3rd year, and against each day, where Aubrey was, what he wrote, and what he received. She had Mr. Lark, the Duke's secretary, transcribing 8 hours a day, and complaining bitterly and refusing to stop. She wrote 14 letters in 5 languages to booksellers, army agents, a retired paymaster at Deal, a Corvanian grain merchant at Coombe, and the widow of a commissary's clerk in the North. And 11 of the 14 answered, because there is nothing in the world so persuasive as a letter written in a man's own tongue by somebody who has plainly read everything he ever printed. The second life was the betrothal. It had to be lived in public. That was the whole point of it, and it was in some ways the harder work, and it was in the Dowager Duchess of Colvane's hands within 4 days, because on the Monday she came down to the library at 8 in the morning in her bonnet and said, "Miss Hale, put down that pen. You went to a saloon in a gray gown and it was magnificent, and it cannot be repeated. You will now be looked at by 400 women who have nothing else to do, and if we do this badly they will not laugh at you, they will pity you, and pity in that town is a lime kiln. So you and I are going to Bracewell's, and then to a Frenchwoman in Sarum Street, and you will not argue with me about money, because it is my money and I am spending it to protect my son's brother's name and my granddaughter, and if it were not so I should not spend a farthing." They came back at 6 with 11 parcels, and Clemency Hale had the grace to be entirely honest about it at dinner. "Your Grace, I have never in my life owned anything that cost more than £4, and there is a gown upstairs that cost 31, and I have been sitting here for a quarter of an hour trying to decide whether to be ashamed of how much I like it, and I have decided not to be." "Quite right," said the Dowager. "It is a tool, so is a scaling ladder." And so the Duke of Colvane and his betrothed went out into the town for 9 weeks, and the town looked at them. They went to 11 dinners, 4 receptions, 2 concerts, and the opera. She learned, in a fortnight, the things one cannot learn from books: how to be handed out of a carriage, how to eat almost nothing at 4 hours' table, how to turn a question. She never once claimed anything she did not have. Asked whether her family were the Hales of Somerset, she said that they were not, and that her father was a scholar of Sarhaven who had catalogued 3 of the great English libraries, and that she had been taught Greek at 11, and had never been taught to dance at all. Asked, twice, with a fan up, what her fortune was, she said, £30 a year and 9 languages, which went round the town in 3 days and was pronounced by the wife of an ambassador to be the best answer given in that season. And the town, which is a great deal more sentimental than it likes to admit, took it into its head to be charmed. There were paragraphs. There was a print in a shop window in Cheapside of a duke on a library ladder handing down a book to a girl in a gray gown, which was a scandalous liberty, and which the Dowager Duchess bought 11 copies of. What Gideon remembered afterward was none of the dinners. It was the ordinary hours. It was Nell Caro, 5 in March, presenting herself in the library on the second day, and standing in the doorway until she was noticed, and asking whether it was true that Miss Hale could talk in 9 ways, and Clemency saying that it was 7 ways properly and 2 badly, and Nell demanding to be taught to say good morning in all 9, which took a week, and which she then performed to her grandmother at dinner, at length, with her hands behind her back. It was the discovery in the 3rd week that Miss Hale could not ride, could not draw, could not sing, and could beat any man in that house at chess in about 11 moves, and the further discovery that when she lost, Mr. Lark beat her twice. She went off and thought about it for a day and came back and did not lose again. It was the evening the Duke of Colvane came in at midnight from a wretched dinner at the Foreign Office, and found the library lit and his brother's widow in it, sitting on the floor beside Clemency Hale with a pile of letters in her lap, reading her husband's hand for the first time in 2 years, and crying without any noise at all, and Clemency simply working on beside her, passing her the next one when she put a letter down, saying nothing whatever, and having sent the servants away. He stood in that doorway for a while, and then went upstairs without being seen, and sat on the edge of his bed with his coat still on for a considerable time. It was the Sunday afternoon in the 5th week, when he came into the library and found her asleep in the window seat with a book open on her chest and the pencil still in her hair, and stood looking at her, and understood entirely, with no possibility of mistake, exactly what had happened to him, and thought, 9 weeks and she has 3 gowns and £30 a year, and the whole town believes it already. And if you say one word of this to her while the pretence is running, you are no better than Arden, who threatens, or than the men who priced her father. You have hired her, and she has your word, and she cannot leave. He put a rug over her, and went out and shut the door. That was the 5th week. In the 6th, the work came to its first crisis, and it came at 11 o'clock at night with the whole household asleep. He was woken at 10 minutes past by Stedman, apologizing, with a candle. Miss Hale desired his grace to come to the library, and had said that she would not have sent if it were not necessary. She was standing at the great table in a shawl over her gown, with 3 candlesticks pulled close, and 4 documents laid out in a row. "Sit down," she said. "Sir, sit down, and do not say anything for 4 minutes." Gideon sat. "On Thursday of the 1st week," said Clemency Hale, "Lord Arden read us 11 lines. 3 of them were the poison. The last of them was about mules, and he said he would not read the rest because it was about mules, and he was not here to torment you. And I have thought about that sentence for 6 weeks, because it was the only careless thing that man has ever said in this house." She turned the first document round. "This is your brother's letter to your father from Rouen, dated the 19th of October in the 3rd year. Number 204 in my index. It is 4 pages about nothing at all, the weather, an ague, a Colvanian priest who plays chess. And here, on the 3rd page, is this." Gideon read the line she was holding under her finger, in his brother's sprawling, untidy hand. "The mules are come at last, 19 of them, and the drivers are the greatest villains in this country. And I have paid 4 times what the beasts are worth, and shall do it again next month with a good conscience." The room went very quiet. Word for word, said Clemency. Every word in the same order, in a letter written to your father 4 weeks before the date on the letter in Lord Ardennes' desk, and in French in his copy, and in English here which tells us something else. But that can wait. She sat down opposite him, and her hands were shaking, and her voice was perfectly steady. A man does not write the same 41 words twice, sir, 4 weeks apart to 2 different people, in 2 different languages about 19 mules. But a forger will. A forger must. He has to make the thing sound like the man. So he takes a genuine letter, one he has had in his hands, in an office, where such letters were docketed and copied, and he builds his 3 poisoned sentences into the middle of it, and he uses the harmless part exactly as it stands, because that is the part that makes it live. Gideon Caro sat in his own library at past 11 at night, and put both hands flat on the table. How did he have a letter my brother wrote to my father? He said. That, said Clemency Hale, is the question that will finish him, because he did not have it, your grace. That letter has been in a sealed case in this room since the month your brother died. She turned the second document round. But there is a copy of it, in the contract's office. Because your brother, being a careful officer in that one particular, sent a fair copy of every private letter that touched upon his purchases to the office in the ordinary course. And I have the office's own receipt for this one, in this pile, docketed and initialed by the clerk who received it. And the initials, sir, are I.V. I.V., said Gideon. It is a clerk's initials. There will have been 40 clerks in that office. There were 61, said Clemency Hale. Mr. Lark has the establishment list. He got it from the stationery office in the 2nd week, because I asked him for anything with a list of names on it. 61 clerks and 11 supernumeraries over the 4 years. She was looking at the docket, not at him. There is one IV he was taken on as a supernumerary copyist in the 2nd year of the war at £90 and left in the peace. His name is Ivo Vesey. She said the name in a voice he had not heard her use before, and Gideon looked up. Miss Hale. Give me a moment. Sit down. I am sitting down. She had both hands flat on the table on either side of the docket, and she was looking at 2 initials on a piece of paper as though they might get up and go. Sir, in the year I was 17 there were 2 undercopyists in the Renfield Library. One of them was a Yorkshireman of 40 named Sudbury who could not spell and was kind to me. The other was a young man of about 26 who had been at a university for a year and had left it under a cloud, and who was the quickest copyist my father ever employed and the best-treated man in that house after him, and who used to bring me almond comfits and tell me that I was wasted on a library. She swallowed. His name was Ivo Vesey. And it was Ivo Vesey who swore that he had seen my father put a book into a wrapper on a Tuesday evening in November. And it was on his word, and no other, that my father was turned away without a character. Nobody in that library said anything for a while. Somewhere below in the house, a clock struck the half-hour. Say it plainly, said Gideon at last, because I am not certain I can hold it. Then plainly, the man who forged the letter that will destroy your brother's name is, I believe, the same man who stole a 9th-century book of Hours out of a library in the north and swore my father into the gutter for it, and he is now, or was lately, in the pay of the Marquess of Ardennes. Clemency Hale lifted her head. And I have been in your house 11 weeks and on your brother's papers for 6, and I did not find him. He found me. Whoever put that transcript into Lord Ardennes' hands did it in the summer, before you had ever spoken 9 words to me. It is chance. It is nothing but chance, and I have been sitting here for 2 hours trying to make it something else, because I am so frightened of what it will look like. What will it look like? It will look, sir, when it comes out, and it will come out, as though the Duke of Colvane's betrothed has accused the chief witness against his brother of forgery, because that witness ruined her father 6 years ago. She said it very quietly. There is not a counsel in England who could not make that sound like the whole of the truth in 4 minutes. Gideon Carrow got up and walked the length of the library and came back. "Then we shall have to prove it so completely that it does not matter what it looks like," he said. "How?" "3 ways, and I have thought about nothing else since 11 o'clock." She turned over a fresh sheet and began, as she always did, to write it in order. First, the mules. 41 words in 2 documents. That stands by itself and does not depend on any person's character. It depends on 19 mules and a docket, and it is the strongest thing we have. Second, the spelling of Gan, which shows the letter to have been written after the peace. And for that I shall want the ordnance man to say when the map was drawn, and I have written to him. Third, and this is the one that will hang him, and the one I cannot do. She put down the pen. Handwriting, not by an expert. Experts are hired by both sides and cancel one another out, and every committee knows it. By a man who knows a hand as a shepherd knows sheep, and who can stand up and say, "This is not Lord Aubrey Carrow's writing, and I will tell you the 11 particulars in which it fails. And further, gentlemen, this is the hand of Ivo Vesey, whom I employed for 2 years, and whose copying I read every day of them. And here are 11 pages of it in my possession for comparison." Gideon looked at her. "Your father," he said. "My father," said Clemency Hale, "who is 68 and half blind, and who has not been asked his opinion on anything by anybody in 6 years, and who kept every scrap of that library's copying when they turned him out, because he said one day somebody would want it. There are 4 boxes of it under his bed at Sarhaven, sir. I have dusted them twice a year for 6 years, and never once opened them. They found Ivo Vesey in 11 days, and it was Mr. Lark who did it, and it cost the estate £9 in coach fares and a good deal of ale. He was living in 3 rooms over a printseller's in a street behind the Strand, calling himself a literary agent and a collector of autographs, and he had a shop plate on the door and a bell, and he was not hiding in the least. And when the Duke of Colvane's card went up on a Wednesday afternoon in the 7th week, the answer that came down was that Mr. Vesey would be very happy, and would his grace be so good as to mind the 2nd stair, which was rotten. Gideon went up alone. Clemency had asked to come and had been refused, and had accepted the refusal after 11 minutes of argument on the single ground that Vesey must not know she was in the case. The room was a surprise. It was lined with books to the ceiling on shelves the man had plainly built himself, and there was a long table under the window with 3 inkstands, 4 pens in a rack, a bottle of oak gall, a stove plate for warming wax, and 11 or 12 small sheets pinned to a board, samples of writing, various hands, various centuries, beautifully done. Ivo Vesey was 32 or thereabouts, thin, with a high forehead and a good coat gone at the cuff, and he rose and bowed and offered his own chair, and had the pleasantest voice Gideon had heard in a 12-month. "Your Grace does me a great deal of honor. Will you take a glass of Madeira? It is not good Madeira, but it is what there is." He poured 2. "I know why you have come. You have come about a letter of 11 lines from Rouen, dated the 14th of November in the 3rd year, which is at present in a desk in Ardennes House. I have been expecting somebody for 4 months, and I am glad it is you and not an attorney. You are frank." "I am the frankest man in this town, sir, because it costs nothing, and everybody takes it for a manner." Vesey sat down on the edge of the table. "Let us not be tedious. I was 5 years a copyist in the Contracts Office at £90 a year, which is £8 less than a butler, and I read in that time perhaps 11,000 documents, and I formed the settled opinion, the perfectly settled opinion, Your Grace, which I would maintain before any committee in the kingdom, that the whole of that service was a trough, and that the gentlemen who fed at it went home to their estates at the peace and were thanked, and that the clerks who copied the vouchers were dismissed in a fortnight with no pension and no character. He drank a little Madeira. Now, do you wish to buy something, or do you wish to accuse me of something? Because the terms are different, and I should like to know which conversation we are having. Did you write that letter? That is the accusation. Very well. Vesey set down his glass, and he was still perfectly pleasant, and Gideon understood then that he was dealing with a man of considerable ability who had decided a long time ago that nothing whatever was owed to him, and that he therefore owed nothing. No, Your Grace, I did not write it. I came by it, in the way that a man in my trade comes by things, from a person who had it out of the office in the disorder of the peace, and I sold it to a gentleman who was interested in the war contracts, and I got £60 for it, and I have paid my rent out of the £60 since June. That is the whole of my part, and there is nothing in it that any court could touch. And the original is in Ardennes House, as I said. No, said Gideon, the original of what was copied. My brother's letter of the 19th of October to my father, of which there was a fair copy in the office, docketed and initialed IV, Mr. Vesey, from which 41 words about 19 mules have been taken out and set into the middle of your 11 lines. The silence in that room lasted perhaps 4 seconds, and in it Gideon watched a very quick mind go the whole distance and come back. Ah, said Ivo Vesey softly, that is clever. That is extremely clever, and it is not you, sir, if you will forgive me. I have read 3 of your dispatches in the printed papers, and you write like a man who has never in his life been obliged to be exact. Who is it? Not Lark. Lark came round this street asking questions like a beetle. He tilted his head. Somebody who reads. Somebody who has had the whole of Lord Aubrey's letters through their hands, and remembered 41 words about mules 4 weeks apart. My compliments to them, whoever they are. I should like to shake their hand and then never meet them again. Did you write it? Your Grace, said Vesey, I have 3 rooms over a print cellar and 1 coat and a bad stair, and you have a house in this town with 4 chandeliers in the saloon, and a mother, and a brother's widow, and a Marquess who wants you for a son-in-law. Consider what you can afford and what I can afford, and then ask yourself whether I am going to say yes to that question in a room with no witness in it. He got off the table and went to the window. But I will say this, since you have come up my stair, and you may make of it what you please. I was 19 years old when I was told I was clever, and I have been told nothing else since. I have copied out other men's letters for 11 years for £90. I have written 400 pages of other men's poetry in other men's hands for the collector's trade in this room. There is not 1 line in the world with my name on it, and there never will be. And in the summer, for the first time in my life, a Marquess came up that stair and sat in that chair and said, Mr. Vesey, I want a thing done that only a man of your skill can do. He turned round, and for one moment the pleasantness was entirely gone, and what was underneath it was so raw that Gideon could not look away. You will not understand that. You cannot. You have been Your Grace since you were 11. He came here, said Gideon. I did not say so. You said a Marquess came up that stair. I said a great many things. It is a fault of mine. Vesey smiled again, and the shutter came down, and he was charming and impenetrable and finished. Here is my offer, and it is a single one, and it does not repeat. There is a second copy of that letter, the draft, if you like. A man of my trade always keeps his workings. It is the only insurance he has. £3,000 and a passage to a country where nobody has heard of any of us, and it goes into your hand, and I shall be very hard to find when the committee sits, and you may make what use of it you can. That is Wednesday's price. On Monday, your grace, it will be 4,000, because on Monday I shall have had time to consider what else I know." "What else do you know?" "I know," said Ivovesi, "that 11 weeks ago the Duke of Colvane engaged, by letter, through his secretary, at £30 a year and board, a person to catalogue his West Library. I know it because I make it my business to know who is buying and cataloguing books in this town. It is my trade, sir, and I am good at it, and the letters that come out of great houses about libraries are read by 4 people before they reach the man they are addressed to." He picked up his glass again. "And I know that a fortnight ago the Duke of Colvane became engaged to be married, in his own saloon, in front of 400 people, to a young lady in a grey gown of whom no person in this town had ever heard, and whose name, I have this from the printseller downstairs, who has sold 91 copies of a caricature of it, whose name is Hale." Gideon Carrow stood entirely still. "Hale," said Vesey, and his voice was suddenly and terribly gentle. "Do you know, that is a name I have not heard in 6 years, and I have thought of it, sir, oftener than you would credit. Go home and ask her whether she remembers a young man who brought her almond comfits. And then, your grace, consider very carefully what a committee of gentlemen will make of a forgery accused by a woman who is on your wage book at £30 a year and in your saloon as your promised wife, and who has a private reason, an old and bitter private reason, to want my neck." He set down the glass. "Monday, 4,000. Mind the second stair going down. It really is quite rotten." He told her the whole of it that evening in the library, with the door open and Mr. Lark writing at the far end, because he had promised her the truth, and because he had discovered in 11 years abroad that the way to tell a person a bad thing is to tell it in one piece, and let them have the room afterwards. Clemency Hale heard it out standing, with her hands behind her back. "Almond comfits," she said, when he had finished. "Miss Hale." "No, it is important, and I shall say it once and then we shall go on." Her voice was quite level and her eyes were not. "When I was 17 and that book went out of the Renfield Library, my father was accused, and I was in the room when the trustee's man told him he must go, and I heard my own father say 4 times, quietly, 'Ask Vesey, only ask Vesey. He was in the North Gallery on Tuesday and he will tell you where I was.' And they went and asked Vesey, and Vesey wept. He wept, your grace, in front of 3 gentlemen, and said that it broke his heart but that he could not swear a falsehood, and that he had seen Mr. Hale put a book into a wrapper. And my father never spoke his name again in 6 years. Not once, not in anger, not in the night, and I have sat up with him in the night. And I have wondered 100 times whether that was Christian charity or whether he simply could not. And now he has done it again to somebody else, and this time it is a dead man who cannot ask him anything," said Clemency. "So we shall go to Sarhaven, sir, and I shall ask my father for the 4 boxes, and I shall have to tell him why, and I do not know what it will do to him. He is 68. That is the only part of this I am afraid of." They went on the Friday, and it was 2 days' journey, and Lady Marian Carrow came with them, and Nell and a maid, and Mr. Lark, and 11 pounds of documents. Sarhaven was a small port with a cliff behind it and a great deal of weather, and Mr. Peregrine Hale had 2 rooms over a rope-maker's in 4 Street, kept by a Mrs. Tench, who had a poor opinion of everybody, but had been feeding him beef tea for 2 years at no charge, and denying it. He was a tall old man, very thin, in a coat brushed to the thread, and he came to the top of the stairs with one hand on the rail, and his head turned a little to the side, in the way of a person who is finding a face by its edges. He knew his daughter's step on the stair from 4 flights down. Then he heard the others behind her and drew himself up and said, with perfect composure, "You are more than one. Papa, this is the Duke of Colvane, and Lady Marian Carrow, And Miss Nell Caro, who is nearly 5, and who wishes to say good morning to you in 7 languages, and will do it whether she is encouraged or not. They stayed 4 days. The room was 10 feet by 12, and had 1,100 books in it, stacked on the floor in courses like masonry, and one good lens on a stand by the window, and a shelf of blocks with letters cut on them in relief that the old man had made himself, and a chair with a hollow in the seat. Gideon Caro spent the whole of the first hour of that visit understanding, slowly, and with a kind of shame, what he had walked into. He had come to ask a favor of an expert witness. What he had actually come to was the room of a man who had been the first paleographer in England, who had catalogued 3 great collections, who was written to from 4 countries by scholars who had no idea he was poor, and who had been sitting in a chair in a rope-maker's attic for 6 years with nobody to give an opinion to, and who now sat with his hands on his knees while his daughter set out on the table, one at a time, the documents of a case in which a great family's honor turned on the reading of a hand. "Read me the transcript again," he said, "the 3 sentences." Clemency read them. Once more, slowly. Now, and the office copy of the letter about the mules. He held out his hand and she put it into it, and he took it to the lens and bent over it with his nose 4 inches from the paper for a long time, and then he sat back and said, "Colvane." "Sir?" "I shall want the original, not a transcript, the paper itself in my hands under that glass." Peregrine Hale's voice was suddenly and unmistakably the voice of a man in his own profession. "I can tell you 9 things from a transcript, and none of them will convince a committee, because a transcript is only some clerk's opinion of what he saw. Handwriting is not read, sir. It is measured. The slope of the ascenders, the pen lift, the direction of the hook, the pressure at the turn, these are habits of the arm and the wrist, and a man may school his letters, but he cannot school his arm for 11 lines. Get me the paper and I will tell you who held the pen. It is in the Marquess of Ardennes' desk, and he will not produce it." "Then he must be made to," said Mr. Hale, "and that is your trade, not mine. But I shall tell you now what I can do without it, and it is not nothing." He turned his head toward his daughter. "Clemency, under the bed, the 4 boxes, it is time." She was on her knees for an hour and a half. The boxes were deal and dusty, and they held 611 sheets of copying done in the Renfield Library between the years of her 14th and her 17th birthday. Catalogue slips, transcripts of charters, fair copies of letters, all of it in 3 hands, her father's, Sudbury's, and a third. "He was a beautiful copyist," said Peregrine Hale, sitting quite still in the chair. "I want that said, and I shall say it to any committee that asks me. Ivo Vesey was the best natural hand I ever trained, and if he had had 400 a year and a little patience, he would have been a great scholar. He had 2 faults, and neither of them was one of skill. He could not bear to be corrected, and he could not bear to be poor." He put out his hand for the first slip. "And he has one habit, and it is in every one of these 600 sheets, and it is in the transcript your daughter has just read me twice, which is how I knew before you asked. Show me the transcript, my dear, and put my hand on the word." Clemency guided his hand. "There," said her father. "Gan, read the letters of it to me one at a time." "G-A-double-N-E." "No," said Peregrine Hale. "Read me the shape of the G." "It has a hook, under the bowl turning back to the left and then up again. It is—" She stopped. "It is a Greek gamma with an English body," said her father. "It is not in any copybook in this kingdom. I corrected him for it 11 times in the year I engaged him, and he would not give it up, because he had it out of a Byzantine catena he copied at 19, and he thought it elegant. And he was quite right. It is elegant." The old man's hands were shaking very slightly now. I have 600 sheets of it under that bed. And there is not one instance in the whole of Lord Aubrey Carrow's writing. I would wager my sight on it, because your brother, sir, if I may judge him from the 4 letters your daughter, forgive me, from the 4 letters Miss Hale has read to me this afternoon, wrote a plain, hurried, honest schoolboy's hand with no elegance in it whatever. There was a silence in the little room over the rope-maker's shop. "Papa," said Clemency, "the committee sits in a fortnight." "Then I shall want a coat," said Peregrine Hale. Gideon walked on the cliff path with the old man on the last morning, at Mr. Hale's request, and the request had been made in a manner that gave him no illusion whatever about what was coming. They went 400 yards slowly, with the old man's hand on his arm and the sea below on the left, and then Mr. Hale stopped and said, "Now, sir, my daughter is not engaged to you." Gideon considered 11 answers and gave the true one. "No." "Thank you." Peregrine Hale turned his ruined eyes toward the water. "I'm half blind, your grace, and it has made me a great deal harder to deceive, because I cannot see the face and am therefore obliged to hear the voice. When she says your name, it is 2 notes lower than when she says mine. And you have been 4 days in that room, and you have twice moved the lens for her without being asked, and you carried the 2nd box, and last night at supper you knew before she did that she wanted the salt." He said it without any particular emphasis. So there is a pretence, and there is something under it which is not a pretence, and I am 68 and I shall ask my question, and you will forgive an old man in a brushed coat. What do you intend? "To marry her," said Gideon, "if she will have me when it is over." "Why not now?" "Because she is in my house at £30 a year, sir, and I hired her, and she has given me her word to keep up an appearance for 9 weeks, and she cannot leave that room without breaking a bargain she made to help my brother's widow. A woman who cannot say no is not free to say yes." Gideon heard his own voice go rough. "I have watched what is done to people who have nothing. I have watched a Marquess do it to her in my own drawing-room with his hand on her arm. I will not be the second man in that house who tells her what she stands to lose." Peregrine Hale walked on a few paces. "You are quite right," he said, "and you are also being a great fool, and both of those things are commonly true at once, which nobody tells young men. She is 24, and she has been the only support of a broken old man since she was 18, and she has never once in that time been offered anything for nothing. If you wait until the day it costs you nothing to speak, sir, you may find that it also costs her nothing to refuse, and that she has spent 6 weeks making herself ready for it." He turned. "Do not tell her while she is your servant, that is right, but do not wait a single hour after." They came back to town on the Wednesday, and on the Thursday, at 11 in the morning, Lady Vespasia Arden called on Clemency Hale, alone, without her father's knowledge, and asked to see her in a room with the door shut. Gideon had the account of it that afternoon, and he had it in Clemency's usual order. 1. She does not want to marry you, has never wanted to marry you, and asked me to tell you so in the plainest terms so that there should be no gallantry about it. She is 26, and she has been offered to 4 men in 8 years, and she says that she has come to think of herself as a piece of plate that is brought out and looked at and put back in the bays. 2. She is being pressed to accept a Mr. Considine, who is 49 and has an interest in her father's borough, and the pressing began in September, 4 days after our betrothal was announced, which means that on that day she ceased to be useful to her father in your direction and became useful in another. She told me that. She told me quite dryly, sir, and then she looked at the window for a while." 3. Clemency's hands were folded very tight. In July her father's secretary drew £60 in cash and entered it in the private book as to Mr. V. for services on the 11th, and she saw the entry because she keeps her father's private book. He has her keep it. She has kept it since she was 20. He says a daughter's hand is neater. And she remembers it because there was a query about it from the bank, and she was made to write the letter. Gideon sat forward slowly. She will not swear to it, he said. She will swear to it, said Clemency Hale. That is why she came. She said, and I shall give it to you in her words, because I do not think I could improve them, that she has spent 8 years being a thing that is used, and that she finds she would rather be a witness than a piece of plate, and that her father will never forgive her, and that she has 300 a year of her own from her mother, and can live on it, and that she has calculated the whole of it, and does not require to be argued with. She looked up, and then she asked me whether it was true that I had refused to take £200 for this work, and had insisted on 30, and I said yes. And she said, then it is true what the Duchess told my aunt. And I said, what did the Duchess tell your aunt? And she said, that you are not his betrothed at all. The room went very quiet. My mother, said Gideon. Your mother, sir, in confidence to her own sister 3 weeks ago, in distress, no doubt, and meaning no harm in the world. Clemency Hale put her hand flat on the table. And her sister is a woman of 70 who has told 9 people, and one of those 9 is a person whose maid is walked out with by a clerk in Ardennes House. It has been running about that town for a fortnight. Lady Vespasia has heard it in 3 drawing rooms. She drew a breath. So we have 5 days, and they know. That was the Thursday. The Marquess of Ardennes' ball was the Saturday, and they went to it, because not going would have said everything. And in the middle of it, in a room with 300 people and 1,100 candles, the Duke of Colvane danced with Miss Clemency Hale for the second time in 9 weeks, and afterwards took her out onto the stone terrace at the head of the steps, where there were 4 other couples and a great deal of cold air, and gave her a ring. It is not new, he said. It was my grandmother's, and my mother sent it down to my room this afternoon with a note. And the note said, tell her that I am ashamed of myself, and that I shall say so to her face on Monday, and give her this tonight, because there is a whole town watching her hands. I have read the note 4 times, and I am obliged to tell you that my mother is a better man than I am, and that she is entirely right about the hands. Clemency Hale looked at the ring in the palm of her glove. 3 small diamonds and a sapphire, very old, worn thin at the shank. Sir, she said, if I put this on, then on Friday, when this ends, I must take it off in front of somebody, probably in front of you. Yes. And you know that, and you are giving it to me anyway at a ball in the house of the man who is going to break us both on Monday. And she stopped and turned the ring over, and her voice was suddenly quite unsteady for the first time in 9 weeks. Your Grace, I am 24, and I have never worn a ring in my life. Gideon Carrow stood on a stone terrace with his hands at his sides, 3 feet from her, with 400 lit windows behind them. Then wear this one, he said, and hear one thing, and then we shall go in, and I shall not say another word until the committee has reported. There is a sentence I am not going to say to you tonight. I am not going to say it while you are in my house at £30 a year and bound by a bargain, because your father said a thing to me on a cliff at Sarhaven that I shall remember all my life, that a woman who cannot say no is not free to say yes. He watched her put the ring on with her glove still on, which was not correct, and which he thought afterwards the loveliest thing he had ever seen anybody do. But when it is over, Miss Hale, when the report is printed and your father's boxes are back under his bed, and you are free to walk out of that library and never see any of us again, I shall come and find you, wherever you are, and I shall say it then. The Sunday was the last quiet day, and Gideon Carrow did not know it, and afterwards he was glad of that. They did not go out. There was no ball, no dinner, no morning caller admitted past the hall. The town had exhausted itself at Ardennes House and was lying down. It rained from 10 o'clock, the steady gray rain of a November that has given up, and the West Library at Colvane House had 4 candles lit at noon, and a fire that Stedman kept up all day without being asked. Nell Caro was in it from 11, on the hearth rug, sorting Mr. Lark's discarded slips into piles, by no principle anybody could establish, and defending the principle vigorously. Marian was in the window seat with her husband's letters. She had got as far as the 2nd year now, and was reading them in order, 4 or 5 a day, and had said at breakfast that she meant to be finished by Christmas, and to have his account of the crossing of the Gann in her own hands before any committee in England read it aloud. Mr. Tobias Lark sat at the end of the great table copying an army agent's return and complaining about the paper. And Clemency Hale stood at the wall with the great calendar sheet and a pencil, going through the last 11 days of December in the 3rd year, hour by hour. Gideon read his brother's letters for 6 hours that day, and he had not done it before. That was the confession he made to nobody except, eventually, his wife. He had had those 3 cases in his house for 2 years and had not broken the seals. He had told himself it was because the papers were an estate matter and would be wanted whole. And the truth, which he understood at last on the Sunday with the rain on the windows, was that he had been 11 years abroad while his brother was alive, and had come home in the peace to a funeral, and that reading 11 years of an easy, warm, ink-blotted, ungrammatical hand telling him about mules and priests, and a bad chest, was the nearest he would ever get again to being in a room with him, and he had not been able to face it. At 4 o'clock he came to a letter of the 5th of December in the 3rd year, from a village whose name Aubrey had spelt 3 different ways in 4 lines, and read it twice, and got up and went and stood at the window with it in his hand. Clemency put down her pencil. "Which one," she said, "is asking my father for money, £200 of his own privately, not through the office." Gideon did not turn round. "There is no grain at Gann. The transports are lost, the roads are gone, and he has bought 1,100 weight of flour out of a monastery at 4 times the price and paid for it himself, and he is writing to my father to be reimbursed because he cannot get it out of the commissary general in under 6 weeks. And here at the bottom he says," he had to stop for a moment. "He says, 'Do not tell Marian how it is here. Tell her the mules are come.'" Nobody said anything. The rain went on. "That is the answer to the whole of it," said Clemency Hale quietly. "You understand that, sir? That is the answer. The letter in Lord Arden's desk says he took £8,000 to let the weights at Gann be made up short. And here, 4 weeks after the date on it, your brother is writing home to borrow £200 of his father to feed the same men out of his own pocket." She came and took the sheet from him, very carefully, and read it herself. "It goes at the front. It goes at the very front, before the mules and before the map. Number 1. It proves nothing. A man may do both." "No, he may not," said Clemency, "and every gentleman on that committee has been in the world long enough to know it. A man who is taking £8,000 in secret commissions does not write to his father for 200, and pay a monastery 4 times over, and then ask that his wife be told a comfortable lie about mules. He may be a rogue, or he may be your brother. He cannot be both in the same December." She laid it flat on the table and squared it, which was what she did with everything that mattered. "And it is not evidence of a forgery, sir. It is something better and worse. It is the man. When the mules and the G have done their work, that is the paper the chairman will read at home in his own chair." Mr. Lark's Morning Post had brought 2 things, and they came out after Nell was taken up to her tea. The first was from the Ordnance Draftsman, 4 lines and an enclosure, stating that the survey of the northern provinces of Corvania had been begun in the autumn of the peace, that the sheet including Gann had been engraved in the spring following, and that the spelling Gann, with the double N and the final E, first appeared in print upon that sheet and nowhere earlier, the army throughout the campaign having used the form GAN, with a proof impression enclosed, docketed and dated by the office. Clemency read it twice, put it in the second folder, and said, "That is a wall. That cannot be argued with by anybody. A letter cannot be written in the 3rd year of a war in a spelling invented 3 years afterward." The second was from Mr. Lark himself, who had spent 4 days in a coffee house near the old contracts office buying dinners for retired clerks, and who now stood up at the end of the table and gave his report with his ears going red, because he had been a fortnight discovering that he had a talent. "There were 61 clerks, your grace, and 11 supernumeraries, and I have found 9 of them living in this town. 7 of the 9 remember Vesey. 4 of them dislike him. 2 of them Mr. Paget, who is now at a wine merchant's, and Mr. Coles, who has a school at Islington, will swear that Vesey was employed for the whole of the 2nd year in the docketing of the private correspondence of commissaries in the field, that he had the keeping of the letter book, that he was the fastest copyist in the office, and was used for anything wanted in a hurry, and that he twice offered, in his cups, to write any man's hand for a guinea." Lark turned over his paper. "And Mr. Coles says, I have it in his own words, sir, and he will put it in an affidavit, that in the peace, when the office was broken up and the papers were going into sacks, Vesey was one of 4 men employed to sort them, and that Mr. Coles saw him put papers into his own coat and said nothing, because everybody was doing it, and because the alternative was the fire." "Everybody was doing it," said Gideon. "There were 400 sacks, your grace." "Then that is where he got it," said Clemency, writing. "He did not steal a document to order in June. He has had a coatful of other men's letters for 6 years, in 3 rooms behind the Strand, waiting for somebody to want one, and in June a Marquess came up his stairs." She stopped writing. "Mr. Lark, that is very fine work indeed." Mr. Tobias Lark, who was 29, and had been the Duke of Colvane's secretary for 4 years, and had never in that time been told that anything he did was fine, went the color of a brick, and could not speak for some seconds. They dined, the 4 of them, at 6, informally, at the small table in the room off the library, and Gideon Carrow afterwards regarded that dinner as the last hour of a particular kind of happiness, the kind that is entirely unaware of itself. Marian talked. That was the extraordinary part of it. Marian Carrow, who had not accepted an invitation in 2 years and who spoke to her own household in monosyllables, talked for 3/4 of an hour about Corvania, about the house at Rule with the vine over the door, about the Corvanian priest who played chess and cheated, about the winter she had been 6 weeks with no letters, and she laughed twice, and at the end of it she said, "I have not said his name at a table since he died. It has been in my mouth all evening, and nobody has looked at their plate." Afterwards there was chess. Clemency beat Mr. Lark in 19 moves, having lost to him twice in October, and having, in the interval, thought about it. And then she played Gideon and beat him too, and he protested that he had been reading his brother's letters for 6 hours and was not fit for it, and she said, "That is what my father says. He has said it since I was 11, and it has never once been true." And at 10:30, when Lark had gone home and Marian had gone up, they were alone in the library with the fire down to red and the rain still going, and the great calendar sheet on the wall with 11 days left blank at the end of it. "4 days," said Clemency. "5." "4, sir. Nothing will be done on Thursday but sit and be frightened. I have never once got any work out of the day before a thing." She was tidying the table, squaring the folders, putting the pencil back into the standish and taking it out again and putting it in her hair. "Your Grace, if the report clears him, when it is over and printed, what will you do?" Sell nothing, mend the roof at Colvane, and go abroad no more. He watched her hands. And you? Finish your library, said Clemency Hale. There are 9,000 volumes left, and I have found 4 things in it that no bookseller in England knows exist, and one of them is a Colvanean grammar of the 16th century with a duke's name in it, and I mean to write to Vienna about it and be extremely insufferable. She set the last folder down. And take my father a new lens. He has wanted a 4-inch glass for 11 years and will not say so. Miss Hale. Do not, she said, not unkindly, and put her hand for a moment flat on the folder she had just squared, as though holding something down. 4 days, sir. Say it on Saturday. Gideon Carrow went up to bed at 11, and slept better than he had in 9 weeks, and came down at 8 the next morning to a boiled egg, a cup of coffee, and a weekly newspaper of 4 pages that Stedman had laid, folded, beside his plate. It began, as such things do, with a newspaper on a breakfast table. Not one of the great papers. A weekly of 4 pages that lived on paragraphs, and the paragraph was on the 3rd page under the heading A Ducal Romance, and it ran to 19 lines, and Gideon read it standing up with his coffee going cold at his elbow. It said that the town had been much diverted these 9 weeks by the engagement of a certain duke, lately of the diplomatic service, to a young lady of no known family, presented to 400 persons in a plain gown. That the writer had it upon authority, he had no reason to doubt that the young lady had been in that nobleman's house since the summer in the character of a cataloguer of books, at a salary of £30 by the year, and remained upon the household establishment at that figure. That the announcement had been made within 11 minutes of another announcement, which a certain noble Marquess had been prevented from making, and that persons interested in the forthcoming inquiry into the war contracts might find these dates worth their attention. And then the last 4 lines, which were the ones that mattered. They said that the young lady's father was a scholar of Sarhaven, formerly keeper of a great library in the north, from which post he had been dismissed in a certain year, without a character, upon the disappearance of a valuable manuscript afterwards found in a foreign sale-room, and that it was a curious circumstance that the chief witness against the father, a Mr. V., was understood to be also the person from whom certain papers concerning the late commissariat had lately been obtained. Gideon read it 3 times. Stedman, he said, where is Miss Hale? In the library, your grace, since 6. Has she seen this? There were 2 copies came to the house, sir, said Stedman, who had been 11 years in that house, and who was standing rather straighter than usual. One to yourself, one addressed to Miss Hale in a clerk's hand, by the twopenny post, and it was on her table at 7. She was at the great table with the paper open in front of her, and she had not been crying, and she had written half a page of notes. It is very well done, she said. You must admit it is very well done. There is not one untrue statement in it. Every single fact in those 19 lines is exactly correct, including the £30 and the 11 minutes, and there is not a syllable that could be answered in a court, and it destroys the whole of 9 weeks' work in the time it takes to read it aloud at a club. She turned the paper round. It is not Vesey. Vesey would have been wittier and would have got the salary wrong. This has come out of a house with a private book and a secretary. The Marquess of Ardennes wrote at noon, in his own hand, 4 lines. That he was very sorry to observe that the newspapers had become intolerable, that he had always thought Miss Hale a charming young person, that he begged the Duke would do him the honor of calling in Grosvenor Street at 5, and that he flattered himself the whole difficulty might yet be arranged between gentlemen. Gideon called at 5, and it took 20 minutes, and it was the most civilized conversation he had ever had. You will not insult me by supposing I put that paragraph in, said Ardennes, pouring. I did not. I do not deal in newspapers. It is a vulgar trade and it leaves a mark. But I shall be candid with you. I knew of it, and I did not stop it, and I could have stopped it, and I want you to understand precisely that, because I want you to understand what I am and to stop hoping that I am something else. That is the whole of my advantage over you, Duke, in this and in everything. You keep hoping. Say your terms. There are no terms. Terms are for merchants. The Marquess sat back. There is a state of things, and I shall describe it, and you will see it as clearly as I do because you are not a stupid man. On Friday next a committee of the House sits, of which I am the second member and Sir Halbert Crome the chairman. In my desk there is a letter of 11 lines. It is at present a private paper. If it is laid before the committee, it will be printed in the appendix to the report, and it will be in every paper in the kingdom within a week, and your brother's name will be attached to 1,100 men on half rations for the next 100 years, and your brother's widow will not be received in 11 houses in this town, and your niece, who is a very taking little creature, and who said good morning to me in Italian, which I did not care for, will grow up as the daughter of the commissary, who fed the army short weight. And it is false. That is not the point, and you know it is not, or you would not have spent 9 weeks in a library. Arden set down his glass. Here is the point. You believe you have found the flaw in it. Perhaps you have. 41 words about mules, I have heard of it. My secretary has heard of it. A person of my acquaintance in a street behind the Strand is very much impressed by it. Very well. Now consider who must stand up in that committee room and say it. He held up one finger. A young woman who is upon your household establishment at £30 a year, whom you presented to 400 people as your betrothed within 11 minutes of my announcement, and who is not your betrothed, and every drawing-room in this town has known it for a fortnight, whose father was dismissed without a character on the oath of the very man she now says is a forger, and who has, therefore, 3 motives that a child could name: her wages, her ambition, and her revenge. He lowered the finger. I shall not have to break her, Duke. I shall not raise my voice. I shall ask her 9 questions to which the truthful answers are all yes, and I shall thank her and sit down, and every gentleman in that room will look at her and be sorry for her and disbelieve every word. And that is what your 9 weeks in the library has bought you. You have taken the one piece of evidence that could have saved your brother, and you have put it into the mouth of the one person in England who cannot be believed when she says it. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the house a door shut. "What do you want?" said Gideon. "I want what I have wanted since July, to be connected to your family." The Marquess of Arden said it simply, and it was, Gideon understood, entirely sincere. "I have £400,000, a borough, and no son. My daughter is 26, and I have made a mess of her, and I know it. You have a name that goes back to the 4th Henry and no money that is not tied up, and a brother's memory that can be saved or destroyed by a piece of paper in my desk. That is not wickedness, Duke. It is the ordinary arithmetic by which every family in this kingdom has been built, including yours." "And Miss Hale?" "Miss Hale," said Arden, "will be given £400 and a character from my own hand, and the post of librarian to my collection at Arden lay at £60 a year, which is more than any woman in England is paid for such work, and which I would give her honestly and with pleasure, because she is the cleverest person who has been in my drawing-room in 9 years, and she will be spared standing up in a public room next Friday and being asked those 9 questions in front of the newspapers." He rose. "Think of that part, sir, if you cannot think of the rest. I am offering you the one thing you cannot buy, that she does not have to be broken in public, and you may tell her I said so, for I would rather she heard it from you than from me." Gideon Carrow came out into Grosvenor Street at 5:30, and stood on the pavement for a while in the cold. 2 things came in on the Tuesday, an hour apart. The first was a letter from Mrs. Tench of 4 Street, Sarhaven, written in a large, careful hand, saying that she was sorry to trouble Miss Hale, but that the old gentleman had taken a chill on the Sunday coming back from church against her advice, and had been 3 days abed with a rattle in his chest, and that the doctor had been twice, and that he would not have his daughter written to, and had said so 9 times, which was why she had written. The second was from Mr. Lark, who had gone to the street behind the Strand at 10 in the morning, with a banker's draft for £3,000, and the Duke's authority to close with Ivo Vesey, and who came back at 11, and stood in the middle of the library, and said that the rooms over the print cellars were empty, that the shelves were down, and the table gone, that the print seller had been paid a quarter's rent in lieu of notice on Monday afternoon in gold, and that a neighbor had seen 2 boxes carried out, and a hackney taken toward the west, and that pinned to the inside of the door, addressed to his Grace, was a half-sheet with 9 words on it in a beautiful hand. Gideon read them. "I am sorry, the other gentleman offered more. IV." Clemency Hale stood at the great table with the letter from Sarhaven in one hand and the half-sheet in the other, and Gideon watched the 9 weeks go out of her all at once. "Sit down," he said. No, she set both papers down squarely side by side. "Your Grace, I am going to say a great many things, and I want them said before I lose the power of saying them. Sit down yourself, sir, if you please, because you have been standing since 5 o'clock yesterday. 1. My father has a rattle in his chest, and he is 68, and he will not be brought 2 days in a coach in November. And if he is brought, he will not be fit to be examined. And if he is examined, it will be by Lord Arden, and Lord Arden will ask him about a Tuesday evening in November 6 years ago, and he will do it very gently, and it will kill him, not figuratively. I have sat up with him in the night, and I know what his heart will bear. 2. Vesey is gone, and with him the draft, which was the only chance of the original. 3. Lord Arden is right. She said it without any tremble at all, which was worse. He is right, sir, and I have known it since the paragraph came at 7 o'clock yesterday morning, and I have spent 19 hours trying to find the place where he is wrong, and there is no such place. If I stand up on Friday, I am a woman on your wage book who called herself your betrothed, and whose father was ruined by the man she accuses. Every word of that is true. And the mules and the map and the Greek G will all be perfectly good evidence, and it will not matter in the least, because evidence does not walk into a room by itself. It is carried in by a person, and if the person is not believed, the evidence is not heard. I have spent 6 years watching that happen to my father with a much better case than this. Miss Hale. 4. Your mother came to me at 8 o'clock last night. Clemency's chin came up. She was very brave. She came herself and not by letter, and she said the thing she had come to say in the first minute instead of the last, which cost her a great deal. She apologized for having spoken to her sister. And then she offered me £2,000 and a place in a household in the north, if I would go tonight and write a letter breaking the engagement, and saying that I had never been more than the librarian, and that any misunderstanding had been my own doing. For Nell's sake. And she cried, sir, and she was ashamed the whole time she was doing it, and she is not a bad woman, and I have never in my life been so sorry for anybody. Gideon shut his eyes. What did you say to her? I said no to the £2,000, said Clemency Hale, and yes to everything else. He got up, she held up her hand, and he stopped. Because it is right, she said, not because I am frightened. Sir, look at the board on that wall. 9 weeks of work, and it is good work, and it will clear your brother's name if it is carried in by anybody in England but me. So it must be carried in by somebody else. It must be carried in by Mr. Lark, who is your secretary and a man, and dull as ditchwater and entirely respectable, and by the ordnance draftsman about the map. and by the clerk from the office who can prove the docket, and by Lady Vespasia Arden, who is a marquess's daughter with 300 a year of her own and no motive on earth but her conscience, and whom nobody can call a hired woman. Every single piece of it can go in through somebody else's hands. Every piece but the handwriting, and for that we must have my father, and we cannot have my father, and so we must do without the handwriting and hope the mules are enough. And you? And I shall be at Sarhaven with a rattle in a chest and a kettle, said Clemency, which is where I ought to be, and which is a thing I would be doing this week, whatever any duke or any marquess in this kingdom wanted, because he is my father and he has nobody else. She took off the ring. She did it quite matter-of-factly, and set it on the table between them on top of the newspaper, and Gideon Carrow looked at it, and found that he could not for a moment do anything at all. "That is your grandmother's," she said, "and I have worn it 4 days, and I have looked at it about 1100 times, and thank you. There is a coach at 6 in the morning, and I have written to Mrs. Tench. And, sir, do not follow me. Not this week. You have 3 days and a committee and a brother, and if you come to Sarhaven now, you will be a duke who abandoned his brother's cause to run after a librarian, and Lord Arden will say so, and he will be right about that too." "And afterwards," said Gideon. Clemency Hale stood on the other side of the table with her hands at her sides, in the second of her 3 gowns, because she had sent the 11 parcels back upstairs that morning. "You said on the terrace that when it was over you would come and find me wherever I was, and say a sentence." Her voice went at the last word, and she stopped, and took a breath, and finished it anyway. "I have thought about that sentence a great deal more than is good for me, and I am not going to pretend otherwise at 11:30 in the morning with everything falling down. But there is no afterwards until Friday, sir. Save your brother. That is what the 9 weeks were for." She went at 6 the next morning in the dark, in the second gown, with a bag and 11 books. And the Duke of Colvane, who had given his word not to follow her, and had 4 days and no witness, and no original and no evidence but a dead man's mules, stood at a window on the first floor, and watched the coach lamps go down the street and out of sight. Sir Halbert Crome lived in 11 rooms at the top of a house in Devereux Court, and had been in the house 34 years, and he received the Duke of Colvane at 9 o'clock on the Wednesday morning in a dressing gown, over a boiled egg, and did not offer him anything. "You should not be here," he said. "I am chairman of a committee that sits on Friday, and your brother's name is on my list, and if this becomes known, I shall be obliged to say so to the House." "Then let it be known, sir, and say so, and I will say the same," said Gideon. "I have not come to ask you for anything. I have come to tell you a thing about my own case that my opponent means to tell you on Friday, and I would rather you had it from me." Crome put down his spoon. "Sit down," he said. It took 11 minutes. Gideon told him the whole of it in order, as Clemency had taught him to do without ever saying so. The announcement Arden had come to make, the woman on the library ladder, the hour, the 9 weeks, the £30 a year. The fact stated plainly, twice, in words that could not be got round, that Miss Clemency Hale was not and had never been his betrothed, and that the engagement had been a device of his own making, conceived in a corridor in 4 minutes, and that she had consented to it upon 3 conditions, of which the third was that he should tell her the truth. Then the evidence, the 11 lines, the 41 words about the mules, the docket initialed IV, the spelling of Gan, the 600 sheets under a bed at Sarhaven, the £60 entered in a private book on the 11th of July as to Mr. V. for services, and Ivo Vessey's 9 words pinned to the inside of an empty door. Sir Halbert Crome heard the whole of it without moving. "Why have you told me the first part?" he said at the end. "Because Lord Arden will use it on Friday to destroy Miss Hale's credit," said Gideon. "And he will be entitled to. And if he tells you first, then everything after it is discounted. And because she has gone to Sarhaven to nurse a sick father and has taken herself out of the case. And the last thing she said to me was that the evidence must be carried in by other hands. So I am carrying it. And, sir, because in 11 years in the service, I have watched a great many men decide that a small dishonesty was necessary in a good cause, and it never once was, and I am done with it." Crome got up and went to the window, and stood there with his hands behind him for some time. "I knew your brother," he said. "Not well. He came before a committee of mine in the second year of the war about mule transport, and he was the only witness in 9 days who admitted that he did not know something." He turned round. "Now attend to me, Duke, and understand that I am going to be of no use to you whatever except in one particular, and that I shall be scrupulous to the point of unpleasantness in everything else. Your evidence is not evidence until it is before the committee, and the greater part of it is worthless without the paper itself, because a transcript read aloud in a drawing-room by an interested peer proves nothing at all. Do you understand what you have been doing for 9 weeks? You have been examining a copy of a copy." "Yes." "Then here is the one thing." Sir Halbert Crome came back to the table. "This committee has power to send for persons, papers, and records, and I am its chairman, and no member of it. I do not care if he is a Marquess with £400,000, may hold in his private desk a paper which he intends to lay before us, and refuse it to the rest. I shall move the order this afternoon, and it will be made, and it will be served on Arden House before dinner, and the original of that letter of 11 lines will be in the committee's hands by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, and no person on either side will touch it except in the room and in the presence of the clerk." He sat down again. "That is not a favor to you. If that letter is genuine, Duke, you have this day put your brother's neck in a noose with your own hands, because I shall print it in the appendix, and it will be read in every house in England." "I know it," said Gideon. "And your witness upon the hand is 68 years old, half blind, and 3 days abed at Sarhaven with a rattle in his chest, and is the first paleographer in this kingdom, and is the father of the young woman I have just described to you," said Gideon. "And he cannot come." "Then get another," said Crome. "There is not another, sir. I have spent 2 days about it. There are 4 men in England who could be called experts on a hand, and 2 of them are in the pay of collectors, and 1 of them is dead this year, and the 4th would say what he was paid to say, and every member of your committee knows it." Gideon stood up. "Mr. Peregrine Hale is the only man living who read Ivo Vesey's copying every day for 2 years. There is no substitute for that, and there never will be." Sir Halbert Crome looked at him for a long moment. "Friday, 11 o'clock, the 3rd committee room," he said. "You may attend. Your counsel may not address us. It is not that kind of proceeding. Good morning." And then, when Gideon had reached the door, "Duke, that business in the corridor, the ladder and the hour and the grey gown, it was contemptible." "Yes, sir." "It was also," said Sir Halbert Crome, returning to his egg, "the only interesting thing anybody in your position has done in this town in 9 years, and I am 71, and my wife has read the account of it in the paper aloud to me twice. Good morning." The order was served in Grosvenor Street at 7 that evening, and Gideon knew the hour, because the Marquess of Arden's note arrived at 1/2 past. It contained one sentence in the beautiful bank-front hand: "You have made this public, and you have done it out of vanity, and I shall not now be able to protect anybody. A." His mother went to Sarhaven on the Wednesday. She did it without telling him, which was characteristic, and she did it in the traveling carriage with her own physician, Dr. Meynell, and a hamper, and she left at 5 in the morning and was there by the following noon. And Gideon learned of it from Stedman at breakfast, and stood in the hall with a napkin in his hand for a full minute. Her letter came down by the Thursday evening mail, 11 pages, and he read it standing in the library with the great calendar sheet still pinned to the wall behind him. She had found Mr. Hale better and Mrs. Tench's beef tea superior to anything in her own kitchen, and Dr. Meynell had blistered the old gentleman's chest against his wishes, and pronounced the rattle a bronchial catarrh and not the lungs. She had sat in the room 4 hours. She had been shown the 4 boxes. She had made her apology to Miss Hale in front of her father, at Miss Hale's request, which she said was the properest and most disagreeable quarter of an hour of her life, and had done her a great deal of good. And then, on the 11th page, she wrote, "Now, Gideon, attend to this, and do not tear the paper. At 9 o'clock last night, with the whole house abed, somebody knocked at the street door of the rope makers. Mrs. Tench went down. It was Mr. Ivo Vesey. He has been at Sarhaven since Monday night at the ship, waiting for the packet to Rotterdam, which is wind-bound and has been these 4 days. And he had walked past that door, Mrs. Tench says, on Tuesday and again on Wednesday, and last night he knocked. He asked to see Mr. Hale. Clemency would not have him in the room. Her father said, in a voice I shall not forget, 'Let him come up.' He stood in that little room for 11 minutes, and he did not sit down. He did not confess anything. You are to understand that clearly, for I know it is the first thing you will ask, and I have written down his words as nearly as I can. He said that he had come because he was leaving the country, and did not choose to leave it with a thing unsaid. He said that Mr. Hale had once told him he had the best natural hand he had ever trained. He asked whether that was still true. And your old scholar sat up in his bed, Gideon, with his eyes that cannot see across the room, and said, 'It is true. You were the best hand I ever trained, and you have spent 11 years copying other men's words for money, and I have spent 6 years in this chair without a character, and between us we have wasted the 2 best pairs of eyes in England. Now answer me one question, and I shall not ask you another as long as I live. Why did you say it was me?' And Mr. Vesey said, and Clemency has written it down twice, and we are agreed upon the words, 'Because they were going to ask you, sir, and you would have told them the truth, and they would have believed you, because you were somebody and I was a copyist at £40 a year. There was no other way for it to be me.' Then he put a folded paper on the end of the bed, and went down the stairs and out into the street. It is a half-sheet of a rough draft in his own hand, of 11 lines in French, with 3 sentences written twice over and struck through and written again, and with the mule passage copied out in a fair hand beside it as though from an exemplar. It is not a confession, and any counsel would say so. It is, my son, the workings. We come up on Friday morning. Dr. Meynell forbids it and has been overruled by his patient, who has been out of bed since noon and has had his coat brushed 4 times, and who says that he has waited 6 years to be asked his opinion in a public room, and does not intend to die on the day before. We shall travel through the night. Clemency has the boxes, the draft, and 11 pounds of paper, and she has not slept, and she has told me twice that she will give her evidence and then go home, and I have not argued with her, because she is quite right that she must be seen to want nothing. You will not go to the coach office to meet us. You will be in that committee room at 11 o'clock with your brother's papers, doing your own part, and we shall come to you there. C. The 3rd committee room was paneled to the ceiling, had a horseshoe table and a clerk's desk, and 4 rows of chairs for the public, and it was full by 10:30 on the Friday. There were 9 members present of 11. Sir Halbert Crome took the chair at 3 minutes past the hour. The clerk laid on the table, in a locked japanned case, the original of a letter of 11 lines dated at Rule on the 14th of November in the third year, produced under the committee's order out of a desk in Grosvenor Street. Gideon sat in the second row with Marion on one side of him, and Mr. Lark on the other, and a portfolio on his knees, and looked at the case, and thought about a woman in a leather apron saying, "Get me the paper and I will tell you who held the pen." Arden came in at 5 minutes past 11, and sat in his place at the horseshoe as second member, and did not look at him once. The first hour was procedural and dull and terrible. The clerk read the reference. The committee heard the 11th in a series of witnesses on the general question of the grain contracts. And then, at 12, Sir Halbert Crome said that the committee would take the papers relating to the accounts of the late Lord Aubrey Carow, and asked whether any member wished to be heard upon them, and the Marquess of Arden rose. He was very brief and very grave. He said that it was with the deepest personal regret that he had come into possession, in June, of a document which appeared to bear upon this branch of the inquiry, that he had made no use of it whatever in 9 months, that he had been much pressed, in private, by persons interested, to suppress it, and had refused, that the committee had now, by its own order, taken it out of his hands, which he welcomed, and that he must add, with great reluctance, one word as to the source of the extraordinary allegations which he understood were to be made against that document. He was informed that they proceeded from a young woman who had been for 5 months upon the Duke of Colvane's household establishment as a cataloguer of books at £30 a year, who had been presented to 400 persons in the Duke's saloon as his betrothed within 11 minutes of the moment at which the speaker had been about to make a family announcement of his own, who was not, and never had been, in fact betrothed to him, and whose father, he was sorry to say, had been dismissed from a great library 6 years since, without a character, upon the disappearance of a manuscript, upon the sworn word of the very man she now accused. "I say nothing against the young person," said the Marquess of Arden. "I dare say she believes it all. I am told she is very clever. But I would put it to the committee that the whole of this defense rests upon the testimony of a hired dependent with a private grievance, supported by a broken old man in a lodging at Sarhaven who has no character to lose, and by a person of no character whatever, an obscure copyist and dealer in other men's autographs, one Vesey, who has fled the country this week rather than answer for himself, and who is by every account a wretched little forger who would say anything for money." And the door at the back of the third committee room opened. Gideon Carow turned round with the whole room, and saw, standing in it, his mother in grey, with her chin exactly as it had been in the saloon 9 weeks before, Miss Clemency Hale in the second of her 3 gowns, holding a japanned box in both arms, and between them, upright, in a coat brushed 4 times, with one hand on his daughter's shoulder, and his ruined eyes turned toward the sound of the voice that had just finished speaking, Mr. Peregrine Hale of Sarhaven. And in the 4th row of the public chairs, where he had been sitting quietly since 10:30 with his hat on his knees, a thin man in a good coat gone at the cuff stood slowly up. "Mr. Chairman," said Ivo Vesey, "my name is being used and I should like to correct it." The clerk was on his feet. 2 members were speaking at once. Sir Halbert Crome brought the flat of his hand down on the table once, which was all he ever needed to do in 34 years, and said, "Who are you, sir?" "Ivo Vesey, formerly a supernumerary copyist in the Contracts Office at £90 a year, and before that an under-copyist in the Renfield Library in the north." He was very pale, and his voice was perfectly clear. "The noble lord has just told this committee that I have fled the country. I have not. I have been at the ship at Sarhaven since Monday waiting for a wind-bound packet, and I came up last night on the mail, and I have been in that chair since 10:30. He has also told the committee that I am a person of no character whatever, and a wretched little forger who would say anything for money. And it is the second of those that I have stood up about, because he is quite right about the first." "Mr. Vesey," said Crome, "you are not under examination, you have no standing here, and if you say another word before you are sworn I shall have you removed. Clerks, swear him." They swore him at 4 minutes to 1, and he was in that room until 3:20, and Gideon Carrow, sitting 11 feet away with his hands on a portfolio, hardly moved for the whole of it. He did not repent. That was the thing Gideon told his mother afterward, and it was the only part of the day that had cost him any sleep. Ivo Vesey did not weep, did not throw himself on anybody's mercy, and did not once say that he was sorry. He gave his evidence like a man reading out a bill he had been carrying in his pocket for 11 years, and it was the more terrible for it. That in the June of that year he had been visited in his rooms behind the Strand by a gentleman whom he now knew to be the noble lord's confidential secretary, and afterwards, twice, by the noble lord himself, who had come up 2 flights of stairs and sat in his chair. That he had been asked whether a certain kind of thing could be done. That he had said it could. That he had received £60 on the 11th of July. Entered, he was informed, in a private book as to Mr. V, for services, and a further 400 on the Monday of that week in gold, with a promise of 200 more upon a passage out of the country. That he had made the letter of 11 lines himself, at the long table under his window, in 3 days. That he had taken the harmless part of it, the mules, the drivers, the 4 times the beasts were worth word for word, out of an office fare copy of a genuine letter of Lord Aubrey Carrow's of the 19th of October, which he himself had docketed and initialed in the 2nd year, and had never forgotten, because it was the only cheerful paper in 11,000. That he had spelt the place Gan, from the new map, and had known it was a risk, and had thought no living creature in England would look at it. And that the whole of the 3 poisoned sentences were his own composition, and that he wished the committee to know, rather proud of the 3rd one, and had rewritten it 4 times. Sir Halbert Crome asked him one question at the end. "Mr. Vesey, you understand that you have this afternoon confessed, upon oath, to a forgery which may carry the gravest consequences, and that you were not obliged to say one word of it, and that you had a passage bought and a wind-bound ship and £400 in gold. Why have you done it?" Ivo Vesey stood in the middle of the 3rd committee room and looked at nothing at all. "Because for 11 years, sir," he said, "I have written 400 pages in other men's hands, and there is not one line in the world with my name on it. And this morning a Marquess who came up my stairs twice with his hat in his hand called me a person of no character in a public room, and it was the first time anybody has mentioned my name in a public room in my life." He put his hands behind his back. "And because on Wednesday night at Sarhaven a blind old gentleman I ruined when I was 26 sat up in his bed, and told me that I was the best hand he ever trained, and then asked me one question, and I answered it, and I have not been able to get out of the answer since. I stole the Renfield Book of Hours in the November of that year, and sold it through a Rotterdam house for £211, and I swore Mr. Peregrine Hale out of his place and his character, because if they had asked him, he would have told them the truth, and they would have believed him, and there was no other way for it to be me. I should like that written down, Mr. Chairman, in the same book as the rest, and I should like it printed." It was written down. It was printed. It is in the appendix to the 4th report, at page 911, and Gideon Carrow's grandchildren could find the place without looking at the index. Mr. Peregrine Hale gave his evidence from a chair, which Sir Halbert Crome directed to be carried in and placed at the end of the horseshoe table, and he was 3/4 of an hour, and he never once raised his voice above the tone of a man explaining something to a pupil he liked. He had the original out of the japanned case, under the committee's own lens, with the clerk's hand on the corner of it. He gave them 11 particulars in which the hand failed of Lord Aubrey Carrow's: the slope of the ascenders, the pen lift before the double L, the direction of the hook on the terminal Y, the pressure at the turn of the the spacing after a comma, 4 more, and then the last, which he asked leave to give slowly. The capital G, gentlemen, in the word gan. It has a hook beneath the bowl that turns back to the left and then rises. That is a Greek gamma with an English body. It is in no copybook in this kingdom. It came out of a Byzantine catena which was copied in my library in the year I engaged him, and I corrected him for it 11 times, and he would not give it up because he thought it elegant, and he was right. He set down the lens. There are 611 sheets of his copying in the boxes my daughter has carried into this room, made between the years of her 14th and her 17th birthday, and the mark is on 400 of them. It is on this letter. It is not on any paper of Lord Aubrey Carrow's that has been shown to me, and I have had 11 of them under this glass since Tuesday. Peregrine Hale turned his head toward the sound of the chairman. I am 68, and I cannot see across this room. But I have read that man's hand every day for 2 years, and I would know it in the dark by the smell of the ink. And I have waited 6 years for somebody to ask me, and I thank the committee for asking me. Nobody in that room said anything for some seconds. Then a member at the far end of the horseshoe, who had not spoken all day, said, "Mr. Hale, who paid for your coming here?" "The Dowager Duchess of Colvane sent her carriage, sir, and her physician, against my will," said the old man. "And I have taken nothing else and shall take nothing else. And my daughter refused £200 for this work in September and took 30, and refused 2,000 on Tuesday night and took nothing. And if the committee wishes to inquire into the state of our purses, it is welcome to do so, for it will not take long." Miss Clemency Hale was examined for 11 minutes, and it was, by universal report afterward, the shortest and the coldest business of the day. She stated her name, her employment, her salary, and her lodging. She stated that she had never been betrothed to the Duke of Colvane, that the engagement had been a device of his to prevent an announcement being made in his own house without his consent, that she had consented to it, that she considered it to have been wrong of them both, and that she had returned the ring on the Tuesday. Asked whether she had a grievance against Ivo Vesey, she said, "The gravest possible, sir, and I have had it since I was 17, and it is the reason I have not spoken one word of the evidence in this room, and would not have spoken one if my father had been able to be brought here without me." Asked by the chairman whether she wished to say anything further, she said, "Only that the 41 words about the mules were found in the 2nd week of October, and are in my hand in Mr. Lark's index at number 204, and that they were found by reading, sir, which is the only thing I know how to do, and that it took 9 weeks, and a great many candles, and any careful person in England could have done it. And I hope the committee will not attend to me at all, but to the paper, because the paper does not want anything." The Marquess of Ardennes was heard on the following Tuesday and was 3 hours, and his defense was that he had believed the letter genuine, had paid the £60 for a copy of an office document, and not for a fabrication, and had been imposed upon by a scoundrel. Lady Vespasia Ardennes was examined the same afternoon, upon her own application, and produced the private book of her father's household in her own hand, and identified the entry of the 11th of July, and the further entry of £400 on the Monday of the week of the hearing, and stated the date on which she had been informed that she was to accept Mr. Considine. The 4th report was printed in February. It found that the letter attributed to Lord Aubrey Carrow was a fabrication, and it printed Vessey's evidence and Peregrine Hale's 11 particulars in full. It found that the deficiency of grain at Gan in the 3rd year had arisen from the loss of 2 transports and the state of the roads, and from no man's dishonesty. And it recorded, in the 11th paragraph, that the conduct of Lord Aubrey Carow throughout his service appeared to the committee to have been diligent, disinterested, and honorable, and that the aspersions cast upon his memory were wholly without foundation. Ivo Vesey was committed for trial and convicted in the spring, and the 2 men who wrote to the court asking that his sentence be mitigated were the Duke of Colvane and Mr. Peregrine Hale, and the sentence was mitigated, and he was transported for 14 years, and became, in the 4th year, clerk to the Surveyor General of that colony, and was in the 11th year the compiler of the first printed catalogue of its public library, in which the preface is signed with his own name, and the capital G has a hook beneath the bowl that turns back to the left and then rises. The Marquess of Ardennes was censured in the report, resigned from the committee, gave up the borough at the next election, and retired to Ardennes, where he lived 9 years and never once mentioned the business. His daughter did not marry Mr. Considine. She had 300 a year of her own, and she took a house in a cathedral town with an aunt, and she and Clemency Hale wrote to one another every fortnight for the rest of their lives. The Duke of Colvane went to Sarhaven on the 9th of February. He went alone in a hired chaise, and it took 2 days, and he had rehearsed a great deal of it and abandoned all of it by the time he reached Fore Street. And Mrs. Tench let him in, and said the old gentleman was at his lens, and Miss Hale was out at the market, and would his grace wait in the parlor, which was a room 8 feet by 9 with a horsehair sofa in it. He waited 40 minutes. Then the street door went, and there were feet on the stair, and Clemency Hale came in with a basket on her arm, and her bonnet strings undone, and stopped. "You did not write," she said. "No. Papa knew. He has known since 11 o'clock this morning, and he has said nothing whatever, and he has been extremely pleased with himself all day." "Miss Hale," said Gideon, "on a terrace in November I told you that when it was over I should come and find you wherever you were and say a sentence, and I have come, and the report is printed, and your father's boxes are back under his bed, and you are not in my house and not on my establishment, and not bound by any bargain to any human creature, and there is nothing whatever in it for either of us. So here it is." He put down his hat. "There is not 1 hour of the last 5 months that I would give up, and there is not one thing in my life before them that I would keep. You have never once said a thing to me that was easier than the truth. You would not take £200, and you would not take 2,000, and you gave back a ring you had looked at 1,100 times because you thought it might make a dead man's name less safe. I love you. I have loved you since a Sunday afternoon in October when you fell asleep in my window seat with a pencil in your hair, and I have carried it about for 4 months without leave to put it down, and I am asking you now to marry me, not for 1 hour and not for 9 weeks. Say no if it is no. You are perfectly free, and you will be perfectly free tomorrow, and I have arranged it so on purpose, and it has been the hardest piece of work I ever did." Clemency Hale stood in a room 8 feet by 9, with a basket of fish and 2 candles in it. "Say the last part again," she said. "I am asking you to marry me." "No," said Clemency, "the part about the window seat." And then she put the basket down on the horsehair sofa and crossed the little room and took hold of the front of his coat with both hands. And Gideon Carow put his arms round her at last and stood there with his face in her hair while the rope-maker's cart went by in the street below. And after a while she said, into his shoulder, in an entirely unsteady voice, "You put a rug over me." I woke up and there was a rug over me, and I lay perfectly still for a quarter of an hour, and did not open my eyes, because I had worked out that you must have done it, and I could not think what to do with my face. They were married at Sarhaven at the end of March, in the church on the cliff, because Mr. Peregrine Hale could not be brought 2 days in a coach in the spring, and the bride was given away by her father, who was 70 in the June following and lived to be 81, and who spent the last 11 years of his life as keeper of the West Library at Colvane House, at £400 a year, in a room with a north light, and 11,000 books, and 3 assistants who were terrified of him. The trustees of the Renfield collection, which had passed to a distant branch, wrote in April a stiff letter of 9 lines that did not contain the word apology, and that enclosed a draft for £1,100 and a formal certificate of character under the seal of the trust, 6 years and 5 months late. Peregrine Hale had the certificate framed and hung in the servants' passage at Colvane House, where the whole household went past it 40 times a day, and refused to put it anywhere else. And he gave the £1,100 to the parish school at Sarhaven, which is there yet, and which has his name on it. Lady Marian Carow went into society again the week the report was printed, in a room where the 4th report was lying on a table, and stayed 2 hours. Nell Carow was 5 in March, and was at the wedding, and dropped the ring, and grew up entirely ordinary and extremely happy, and could recite the 11th paragraph of that report from memory at 9 years old, and never once in her life had to. The Dowager Duchess of Colvane lived at Colvane House another 19 years, and was at daggers drawn with her son's wife about the arrangement of the drawing-room for the whole of the first 12-month and never afterward. And it was she who, in the 3rd year, had the print from the Cheapside window, a duke on a library ladder handing down a book to a girl in a grey gown, framed in gilt, and hung in the small drawing-room where every caller was obliged to look at it. And the West Library at Colvane House was catalogued at last. 9,411 volumes, in 11 folio books in a small, upright, unhurried hand, finished in the 4th year of that marriage, with the compiler's initials at the foot of the last page and beneath them, in a worse hand, the note that a duke had once been permitted to add, and that the household showed to visitors for 80 years afterward. Begun for £30 a year by a young woman on a ladder, who was asked one evening to pretend a thing for an hour, and who is now the best of everything this house contains.